Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Big Brother Canada 11 following week 3, and this is sort of a weird video, namely because we haven't gotten a digital daily today, and we actually got an announcement saying that there won't be one for a couple days for whatever reason, and it came at a pretty bad time too, given the veto meeting hadn't happened yet, and there's still a number of things that are up in the air that could really shake up how this ranking would have played out had we had that information, but I'm going to do my best to break this all down. But there are 14 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 14, we have the latest boot from the season, but here we have Rob. And Rob's game is an interesting one, where on one hand, there's plenty you can knock against him, like the fact that Zach and Ty were so threatened by him that they felt the need to take the shot now. Although I'll also say that Rob did quite a bit well within the game as well, like his ability to build these allies early on, and even in his boot week, he had people voting to keep him in the game. He had 4 votes locked in to keep him, and there was even a potential plan to outright save him. Now, granted, it didn't go through, mainly because this middle alliance didn't see him as that good for their gains, but still the fact that he had these numbers coming into this round is still pretty good on his end. Now, at the end of the day, I'm not sure how long he would have been for the game, and he's not like the best player in the world anyway, as he never picked up that Ty was suspicious of him to begin with, but whatever. But as it is, he was the boot for this week, and because of that, he is here number 14. And with that, there are 13 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win, based on their current game position. But at number 13, we have the player who seems like the most likely to be the next boot, although we don't have 100% confirmation, but here we have Zach. Now, as of recording, we do not have confirmation that Zach is on the block, which could lead to him being a bit higher in this list. However, from the most recent Digitally Daily that we had access to, he did seem like the most likely target, where Hope won the veto, which you would think would lead to there being a replacement nom, and Koozie seemed pretty intent on targeting Zach at this point, and we saw Ty attempt to campaign to save Zach, although Koozie didn't seem all that receptive to it. And plus, there seems to be an indication that Koozie may have built this alliance with a lot of the women in the house to go along with the Zach move. So I feel like, based on the evidence we currently have, Zach seems to be pretty dead to rights at this point, and I feel like if he were to touch the block, he would more than likely be evicted this week. However, it's the fact that he is technically not on the block yet based on what we have from these dailies, and because of that, it's very possible that Zach could have saved himself, and if that were the case, he would obviously be a bit higher on this list, though realistically not too much given just how big of a target he is at this point. But really, I can't really have him any higher than number 13, simply because he seems like the most likely target at this point. Now moving on to number 12, and this is someone you would think would be a little bit higher considering the uncertainty up in the air. However, given what we know about this person, I just have very little faith in this person to do well in the future, but here we have Hope. And somehow my view of Hope went down from last week, where he was on the block and he did win the veto. However, it turns out that he volunteered for the block because he wanted to win the veto competition. And given that in the previous week he seemed very hung up on not winning the HOH, it seems like he doesn't even know what show he's on, to where his main focus is just winning competitions, which is absolutely ridiculous at this point. And even worse is that we saw Ty come up to Hope and try to pitch to him to not use the veto on himself, or possibly even use it on Santina. And the fact that Hope is even considering this idea is ridiculous in my view, and gives me very little faith in him as a player. And I feel like through that, I feel like Hope probably has no chance of winning the game, where I feel like this is probably going to be what we're going to be seeing of him moving forward, where he's going to be mainly focused on winning competitions while not really focusing on any other aspect of the game. And I feel like that's going to make him a perpetual pawn, someone who is always on the block, if not an outright target, if he is going to try to win every competition due to how big of a threat he could be. And in general, he just seems pretty aloof to the strategic game, and because of that, he is here at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11, and we have the other person currently on the block, but here we have Santina, who was Koozie's initial target coming into the week. Now granted, Koozie wanted to put up Vanessa, which could have opened things up for Santina to be saved in that situation. However, at this point, she's in a pretty bad spot where if the noms stay the same, I would assume Santina would go home. And even beyond that, there's potential discussion of her just being an outright target. And in general, I feel like now that Rob is out of the game, she doesn't seem to have many allies. And we even see that not many people trust her. Where one of the things that we got from these digital dailies earlier this week were these DR sessions where people were saying who they trusted the most and the least, and a number of people said that they trusted Santina the least. Now, granted, aside from Hope, no one outright said that Santina was the only person they trusted the least, where Zach and Vanessa came up quite a bit, but it also gives an indication that Santina is just not well liked within the house, and no one actually said that they trusted her the most either. And in general, I feel like with these people leaving the game, she's not that well positioned in the future, which is why she is here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and we have another player that I'm just not feeling that high on, although I am a bit higher on them now than I was last week. But here we have Vanessa. And the main reason I have Vanessa this low is because she was technically going to go on the block this week where Koozie wanted to put her up as a pawn, and there was this serious danger spot that she could have been a target here, particularly if Zach and Ty had anything to say about it, until Vanessa won safety from Canada. And at that point, she wasn't in danger anymore. However, even outside of that, I feel like she's still one of the worst positioned players in the house. She has people like a Zach and a Ty that outright don't trust her. And I feel like while there is now this talk about this women's alliance being put together, I feel like Vanessa is not that well positioned within that as well. And in general, the fact that Koozie even considered her as a pawn indicates that she's not that well positioned either. Now, I think there's still room for Vanessa to move up, and realistically, I'm probably a bit higher on her now than I was before, but I still feel like it's not looking great for Vanessa right now, which is why she is here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have another player that I'm actually a bit surprised by how high they are on the list, and to be fair, there is still some risk for this person this week. However, I did decide to give them the edge over Vanessa, but here we have Dan Zabo, and I still don't think Dan's in that great of a spot either, and there is still technically a risk that he could be put up as a replacement nom, although I think that's less likely at this point. However, the main reason I have him above Vanessa is I feel like there are fewer people saying that they distrusted Dan. Now, granted, that's not to say there aren't people that are weary of Dan. Particularly Ty and Zach, although they seem more likely to lose this particular round. However, no one actually said in their DR that they trusted Dan Zabo the least, which I think is something, and even Shenaya actually included him in her group of people that she trusted the most. So I think Dan is kind of picking up some inroads, and plus there is talk about him wanting to work with Claudia and some of the women, to where I did decide to bump him up a bit. However, I still feel like compared to the other players, he's in not as good of a position right now, which is why he is here number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and I did debate these next two, as I feel like this person is technically in a better position right now and could move up, although I feel like overall they've had lower highs than this other person. But here we have Renee, and the main reason I have Renee lower than this next person is because I feel like she is more so on the outs than certain other people, despite her technically being part of this majority alliance, where we're seeing the emergence of this middle alliance that could run the table in the future. And I feel like within that, Renee is in an okay position. Now, granted, I think she's not in the best position, and I feel like in the future, she could definitely run the risk of being a perpetual pawn, and she seems kind of okay with that. Where there was even talk about her going up as a pawn this week, with Ty pushing for that as well. And granted, I don't think that's going to happen, but still, I feel like out of all the people within this new majority alliance, I feel like Renee is positioned to benefit the least from that. And I feel like I don't see as much upside for her in the future compared to this next person, which is why I do have her here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and I kind of thought about this one as if we are just looking at the way this person has played this week, I think they should probably be lower on this list. However, I feel like in terms of longer term prospects, I probably have a bit more faith in this person to rebound, although that's certainly up for debate. But here we have Ty, and I think Ty has played this week terribly, where he came into this week with Koozie winning HOH, which was one of his better case scenarios. Now, granted, Koozie was more willing to target Zach in that situation. However, Koozie was always more willing to target Zach over Ty, even though people recognize that Zach and Ty were this duo. However, we see Ty pretty much overplay his hand throughout this entire week, and really in this most recent Digital Daily, where we see like Ty trying to campaign to ensure that Zach is not put up. Like, he gets very confrontational with Koozie. He gets into an argument with her. He then goes to Hope and tries convincing him to not use the veto on himself or potentially use it on Santina, which by itself is pretty insane that Hope is even considering this idea. But I feel like Ty is severely overplaying here, and I feel like at this point, people are starting to recognize that Ty is pretty much out in front, sort of similar to Zach, in that he pretty much just dictates to them what he wants them to do without really listening to them. I feel like in general, Ty has displayed many issues as a player that could cause him to slide further down this ranking in the future. However, I still feel like there is a slight chance that he could potentially rebound, where if Zach goes this next week, then I think that could force him to potentially regroup and obviously move forward, as I feel like he's a more active player than someone like a Jonathan, for instance, who we'll be talking about more in a moment. But I feel like there will be people that will say that Ty should be lower simply due to the way that he's been playing this week and just in general not being a very good player. But realistically, there aren't that many good players in this house, so I think Ty could still potentially benefit from that. But for now, I do have to leave him here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have a player who I just mentioned, but here we have Jonathan. And I think Jonathan, in a lot of ways, is the opposite of Ty, where I feel like in general, Jonathan has been a bit more passive as a player, but still pretty well liked. And I feel like ever since losing Rob here, like he has pretty much been in the background. Now, I will say up front that the fact that he fought so hard to save Rob and even went as far as to vote to keep Rob is probably a suboptimal move. And I think along with that burned his relationship with people like Ty and Zach to where they even considered trying to convince Koozie to put him up. Now, granted, this proposal didn't get very far, but I think it indicates that Jonathan is a relatively loyal player and someone that may not always think of the most optimal play at any given point. But even so, I still think he's well liked within the house. I still think there are people that are willing to work with him. Like, I still think he has good relationships with a lot of the women, namely the people that voted to keep Rob around, and particularly Vanessa, who outright said that she trusted him the most. I think Jonathan is still pretty well liked, and I feel like he'll probably be in it for a decent amount of time. Although I will also acknowledge that he has pretty much ceded a lot of ground to the likes of Koozie, Anika, Daniel, and a lot of these other women, where I feel like they're more so running the game now than him. So I feel like that's enough of an issue to where I had to bump him down to number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and really, I feel like this top 5 is largely dictated by speculation, where we have heard about this creation of a new alliance that is driving this push to take out Zach this week, and we haven't seen too much of them forming together, and we haven't gotten too much confirmation that they're planning to stick together beyond this week. However, if they are, then I feel like that will largely dictate these placements in the future. But at number 5, we have the player who I think is probably the least likely to win of this group, but here we have Anika. And I will say that in general, my view of Anika has gone up in the past week, where earlier in the season I said that she clearly didn't know what she was doing, and I still feel that to a degree. However, I feel like she is starting to grow as a player, where she recognized this week that Koozie targeting Zach over Ty was worse for her game, and she even tried to get Koozie to do so. Now, granted, she has been largely ineffective in doing so, but the fact that she recognizes that indicates that she's at least learning the game. And plus, if this alliance is to be believed, then she is probably in the majority alliance. Now, granted, I think the women like Renee, Claudia, and Shenaya are more so running that, and I feel like they benefit more from Zach leaving this week versus the middle alliance that Anika is a part of. And plus, there are people that say that they don't trust Anika very much in the house, like Renee, Claudia. Like, they don't really trust Anika that much. Even Ty has admitted that he doesn't trust Anika that much. So I think that's a bit of a concern there that could lead to her to being targeted sooner than I would like. But I still feel like there's enough there and not as many knocks as other people we already talked about to where I decided to put her here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, we have someone very similar to Anika, but here we have Daniel. And I think Daniel's in a similar spot to Anika, where he recognizes that by Zach leaving this week that the other women in the game will benefit more from that move compared to taking out Ty, and he is someone that fights pretty hard to keep Koozie from targeting Zach and has been pretty ineffective in doing so. So I feel like that's not great on his end. However, the main reason I have Daniel above Anika is I feel like there are more people that say that they trust Daniel than Anika, And yes, while Ty doesn't trust Daniel very much, I feel like most of the house trusts Daniel more than Anika. And in general, I still think Daniel knows the game better than Anika. I feel like I would have more confidence in Daniel to execute him on moves in the future than Anika. So I feel like that was enough to have him above her. But I still feel like on the whole, this is a net negative for him to be losing Zach this week, which is why he is here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and I feel like this placement is the most determined by speculation, as I feel like based on what we've been seeing, there's plenty to question about this person, but I still feel like there's enough upside to have them this high. But here we have the current HOH, and here we have Koozie, and there are things that you can question about Koozie and the way that she has managed this HOH. I feel like for one, her initial plan was to put up Vanessa and Santina on the block, with Santina as her target, where Santina isn't the worst target in the world. Now, ideally, she would go for Dan Zabo, as Dan Zabo doesn't really do much for her game, but I feel like Santina would have been good enough. But the issue is that by putting Vanessa next to Santina, that opens things up for Zach and Ty to potentially flip the vote onto Vanessa, and in doing so would really harm her game. Now, obviously, Vanessa ends up getting safety through Canada, so that doesn't go through, but still, the fact that that was her first instinct isn't that great. And I feel like moving forward, we see her want to target Zach, which on its face doesn't seem like a very good move, as I feel like by doing that, it removes an obstacle for a lot of the other women to come back to working with Ty and in turn lose her a lot of her power. However, I feel like there are some things that are benefiting her. For one, I feel like the way that Ty has been burning a lot of people by his constant defending of Zach and the way that he's trying to campaign to save Zach is something that Koozie could work in her favor. And I also feel like this alliance is something that could benefit her as well. Now, granted, we don't know all the ins and outs of this alliance, so we'll have to see how much this truly benefits her game. But if there is something going on that caused Koozie to feel comfortable targeting Zach, then it could turn out to be a great move instead. So I feel like there's still enough in the air about whether this is all a good move for Koozie that I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt for this week. However, I feel like there's still enough to question that I had to leave her here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and obviously the top 2 are the members of this 3-person women's alliance that supposedly came together with the middle alliance in an effort to target Zach, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But at number 2, I did decide to go with Shenaya, who obviously lost Rob this past week, which wasn't great for her. Now granted, she did vote out Rob, but she did consider keeping him in the game. However, I feel like ever since Koozie won HOH, I feel like her game has greatly benefited, where at this point she's less of a target at this point, and we even saw this new alliance come together where I feel like she is one of the biggest beneficiaries of Zach going home, where I feel like Zach would have been a bit more likely to target her in the future compared to other targets around. And I feel like with this alliance, assuming it holds together, that she will be in a great position moving forward. Now, granted, I feel like the number 1 person benefits even more from this, but I still feel like Shenaya overall benefited from what happened this past week, which is a big reason I have her here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother Canada 11 right now is Claudia. And the main reason I have Claudia above Shenaya is that I feel like she's in a slightly better position than her, to where in addition to having all of these allies, and in addition to benefiting greatly from Zach being evicted this week, I feel like she also has a better relationship with Ty. Now, granted, she does, sort of distrust Ty to a degree, but the fact that Ty still has a good relationship with her, and plus removing Zach would force Ty to work more closely with her, is a benefit to her game. And when you mix in the fact that she is part of this alliance that will benefit greatly from this move, the fact that Ty will be more likely to work with her, I feel like Claudia is just in the best position within the entire house at the time being, which is a big reason I have her here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps out with the channel. Now that the season is done, I'm doing post-season coverage for Australian Survivor Heroes vs. Villains, so you can expect coverage of that. I'm currently covering Survivor 44 as well, so you can expect weekly coverage of that. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which you can join by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that's the video. See ya.